Hello and welcome to my presentation. My name is Carys Dickens and this presentation is called Teaching Beneath and Beyond the Syllabus. This presentation is about my research called Exploring Potential Approaches to Teaching Tap Dance in an ISTD Syllabus Teaching Context, a critical consideration of challenges of historical constructs and lack of representation. In a nutshell, this research aimed to explore how decolonisation approaches in higher education institutions, such as dance colleges and conservatoires, can be applied within private sector dance schools, particularly those following the Imperial Society of Teachers of Dancing ISTD tap dance syllabus, which is the context that I teach in. So, what is decolonisation? Have a little think, pause the presentation if needed, and jot down any thoughts about it or anything you know already. If this is nothing, don't worry, I was in the same position before my master's studies. Decolonisation involves the decentering of Eurocentrism in education. So this means taking the emphasis and importance of things that signify whiteness and instead valuing diverse cultural practices to provide a more inclusive space for non-white or global majority students. In dance education, decolonisation can be encouraged by diversifying curriculum content and giving dance subjects equal weight to promote inclusion. Most dance departments place the most importance on ballet, which perpetuates Eurocentrism because it upholds a historically white aesthetic. So, as educators, we need to look past the common trope that ballet is the foundation of all dance. Researchers in the field argue that tap dance can support a diversified curriculum, steering away from the Eurocentrism of ballet and therefore supporting decolonisation. So let's look further at how tap dance can support decolonisation. First, I'd like you to pause and write down what you know about the history of tap dance. Tap dance was greatly influenced by the African diaspora or the slave trade in America. Through the 1600s to 1800s, interactions between Afro-Irish communities in the Caribbean and America formed the beginnings of tap dance. Tap dance is traditionally synonymous with black dance aesthetics. These aesthetics could be the stylistic movement characteristics such as bodies bent at the waist, knees flexed and arms flying out to the side. And also the music. Welsh Asante argues polyrhythms are one of the key aesthetics of African dance styles because music and movement are interconnected. So I'd like to discuss the rationale for my research project. During my reading for this research, it became evident to me that there is a gap in literature in private sector dance schools about decolonisation and the inclusion and representation of non-white or global majority students and faculty. Therefore, I hope this research begins to fill the gap and contribute to the progression of quality dance education in ISTD dance schools. Also, being a white dance educator, this influenced the rationale for this research because I wanted to see what white educators could do to improve the inclusion of students from diverse racial backgrounds in dance education. West argues that white educators hold a powerful position towards social change. Therefore, I think it is important that white educators are sensitive to their position, not having had a lived experience as a non-white or global majority student. White educators should use every opportunity to do what we can to support the inclusion and increased representation of students from diverse racial backgrounds within dance education. Let's look at the materials and methods for the research. I chose a qualitative research methodology due to the exploratory, fluid and flexible, data-driven and context-sensitive nature of a qualitative research paradigm. Being context sensitive was particularly important to me because this research aims to address that gap in literature within the context in which I teach. It was an action research project that involved 2 one-hour workshop dance classes entitled Tap Dance History. I created a presentation that followed key points on a timeline of tap dance history. Together with my students, we discussed historical constructs, stylistic movement characteristics, and music. Students engaged in non-syllabus learning activities such as improvised warm-ups, rhythmical exploration tasks, and group choreographic tasks. Lots of video resources were shared with students to reference famous African American tap dancers such as Bilbo Jangles Robinson, the Nicholas Brothers, and Gregory Hines. I used purposive sampling to recruit 10 of my current intermediate and advanced one tap student participants. Purposive sampling complements a qualitative research paradigm and helps answer the research questions. Students were given a questionnaire before and after the workshops, which contained mostly open-ended answers to gain qualitatively rich and subjective data about their experience. I also made field notes to support this data and note any emerging ideas. Many ethical considerations were made in the creation of this research, guided by the BERA Ethical Guidelines for Educational Research 2024. Firstly, participant information sheets and informed consent forms were supplied to participants aged 18 plus and parents of students aged under 18 because parental consent for students under 18 was mandatory. Data were collected and stored in line with GDPR and the Data Protection Act to ensure data were collected and stored safely. All questionnaires were collected anonymously and the students' names were pseudonymised in the dissemination of the findings. Data were analysed thematically following the 6-step coding procedure of Braun and Clark to produce themes that supported a qualitative research paradigm. Let's look at the findings of the research. So, through the process of thematic analysis, I constructed a theme entitled Teaching Beneath and Beyond the Syllabus, as per the title of this presentation, which encourages teachers to teach students the history beneath the syllabus and to look beyond what is specified in the syllabus. I then identified 3 sub-themes that were class content approaches: improvisation, non-syllabus choreography, and historical dialogue. We are going to look at 2 of these findings, improvisation and historical dialogue, through the lens of the teacher as a co-learner to support ISTD teachers in implementing these findings. White dance teachers must always position themselves as co-learners with their students. Dissinger's article explores the experience of white dance educators who are committed to providing culturally responsive education for students. As a white dance educator, I really related to this article throughout this research and believe it beneficial for ISTD dance teachers to explore situating ourselves as co-learners when engaging with decolonisation practices. So let's look at the first one of the themes, improvisation. Improvisation was a key characteristic of the African American historical influences on tap dance, stemming from African religious rituals that were circular, percussive and rhythmical, with repetitive singing, chanting and dancing. Now, if we compare that to improvisation and how it is done in an ISTD setting, improvisation is in a very prescribed format where students stand in a line and often improvise to a short 4 to 8 count rhythm set by the examiner. Then suddenly in Advanced 1 and Advanced 2 grades, students are expected to improvise for a minute, which I have always thought is a massive jump. Compared to the historical influences on tap dance, the ISTD setting seems to be systematic and restrictive, lacking spontaneity and social characteristics. Crawford recognised this in her study on ISTD tap syllabus and noticed the lack of individual expression because there are few opportunities to improvise freely. So, in this research project, to explore improvisation in a way that was characteristic of African American influences, in the workshops we did a warm-up that was in a circle. I started by improvising 4 counts of sound with my feet, body percussion and vocalised sound. Then, together, we would repeat this combination several times in a call and response format characteristic of African American tap dance influences. Then we went round the circle and the next student would do their own 4 counts and we'd all repeat and so on and so forth. We did this to African drum music to explore the syncopated rhythms symbolic of African musical influences on tap dance. So that was how we explored improvisation in the project. Let's now look at the questionnaire responses from the students about improvisation. When questioned about the stylistic qualities of African American tap dance influence students had learnt about through this research project, Adele said there was a lot more improvisation in a group setting, and they all cheered each other on, creating an upbeat, high-energy atmosphere. We still do improvisation now in TAP, but it's not in the same way they did. It's now more formal. This suggests that not only did the improvisation exercises provide a learning opportunity about the history of tap dance, but the description of an upbeat, high-energy atmosphere suggests it was more enjoyable too. This could provide an opportunity for more self-expression, as Crawford said the ISTD syllabus lacked. On what students would like to include more of, Morella said, I think more varied music, example, drums. Therefore, students recognise the value of varying the music used, and I would suggest that they took great rhythmical inspiration from the drum music, from my experience. Cruisebanks argues that decolonising dance pedagogies requires us to include Indigenous and diaspora systems of thought. Therefore, using the music styles characteristic of African American influences can uphold the roots of tap dance. This can then contribute to decolonisation by representing the Black dance aesthetics that may not be evident when Eurocentrism prevails in institutions. So where drum music may not be incorporated in ISTD syllabus music, it may be valuable to explore using it in improvisation activities. So looking at improvisation through the lens of the teacher as a co-learner, I would like to look at two key words I would suggest to support the teacher as a co-learner: exploration and vulnerability, inspired by the work of Dissinger when she looked at white dance educators providing culturally responsive education. First, exploration. As an ISTD syllabus teacher, I can see how teachers could get stuck in a cycle of just playing the same syllabus music week in, week out for classes, which I suggest can contribute to rote learning, which can be very repetitive and sometimes monotonous. Therefore, exploring and incorporating music styles characteristic of African American influences on tap dance will probably require a deep dive into streaming music libraries to expand our own musical libraries. Drum music, jazz and ragtime all played a part in the history of tap dance. I suggest that not only will incorporating these different music styles will encourage us as teachers to expand our musical knowledge, but will also enhance the students' musical knowledge by expanding their musical and rhythmical experiences, instead of just playing the same syllabus music week in, week out, which moves beyond the repetition of rote learning. This situates us as co-learners with our students as we both expand our learning beyond just tap dance in the class by increasing our musical knowledge. Again, this is learning beyond the syllabus. Vulnerability. Similarly to Sal Fran's students in her study on the role of jazz dance in the decolonisation of dance departments, if I were asked to improvise for a prolonged period, this would fill me with dread. Therefore, I can sympathise with students. I would argue that we do not do enough improvisation in a relaxed format for students to find it achievable or enjoyable. I wrote in my field notes that Valentina commented that if teachers or examiners participated in a warm-up like the one we did in the project, she would find improvisation more enjoyable and feel much more relaxed for the class or exam ahead, which I think is a great suggestion. Whilst I cannot control what examiners do in ISTD examinations, I can incorporate more improvisation myself, which I think does require vulnerability if teachers like myself feel unconfident with improvisation. Sharing vulnerable moments like this with students could situate us as co-learners and hopefully lead to learning that is enjoyable for all in a safe environment. I would suggest that improvisational learning activities can provide opportunities to expand students' movement vocabulary and knowledge as well, thus teaching beyond the syllabus whilst maintaining the historical influences beneath. So let's look at the second theme for this presentation, historical dialogue. Miller argues that tap teachers must have an in-depth knowledge of tap dance history. So I'd like you to reflect on your training as a student and teacher and think about when you have been taught about the history of tap dance. If you're struggling to think of a time, then your experiences are similar to mine. Crawford acknowledges that historical knowledge is not required in an ISTD tap dance examination for students, and from my experience, nor for teachers either. So let's look at how we incorporated historical dialogue in the project. The workshop classes were mixed content-wise between dialogue and practical learning activities. As discussed previously, technology was utilised in the form of photos and YouTube videos to explore famous African American tap dancers through different key points, referencing the timeline of tap dance history, which I created for the presentation in the classes. The images show some of those slides from that presentation. Okay, now I'm going to show you some of the responses from the student participants. It would appear that students found this a valuable experience. Some have suggested that learning activities exploring famous dancers could be incorporated in classes more, such as choose a famous dancer and create a piece using their stylistic qualities. And Carmen said, more famous dancers, as I found this both interesting and inspirational. Watching YouTube videos provided a reference point for stylistic movement characteristics and also allowed us to enter into dialogue about what these African American performers may have experienced in terms of racism at the times they were performing. This led to further discussions about important issues in dance education, such as Eurocentrism and marginalisation. This is an important step towards decolonisation. Dissinger acknowledges that historical dialogue and discussion are important alongside rehearsal in culturally responsive education. Estelle, one of the student participants, suggested during a class discussion that we explore famous dancers as we learn new syllabus content. Coincidentally, Miller suggests that referencing the history of tap steps that we teach will provide important historical context for young tap dancers. This is important to make students aware of the history and social context in which the dance involved in. With increased awareness, dancers can be educated beyond the syllabus and dance education in terms of history and the experience of African Americans, thus engaging in discussions that are important towards social change and equality and decolonisation in dance education. Looking at historical dialogue through the lens of teacher as a co-learner. I would like to look at the two keywords again, exploration and vulnerability. Exploration. If, like me, prior to this project, your knowledge about the history of tap dance is limited, increasing historical knowledge will likely take some exploration beyond the syllabus. We need to ensure we aren't looking at history through a Eurocentric lens of whiteness, because students will often be familiar with Fred Astaire and or Gene Kelly, but to support decolonisation, I would suggest exploring African American dancers to help dancers reference Black dance aesthetics. Exploring and expanding our knowledge benefits our students. Hooks argues that through self-actualisation or the process of bettering ourselves as educators and continuing our learning, we can enhance our students' learning for life. Suggesting again that if we invest in our own learning, we can help teach beyond the syllabus and teach important things to students beyond the tap dance class and the tap dance syllabus. Now, vulnerability. In discussing race, white educators may be concerned about misrepresentation. This is a legitimate concern that I can sympathise with because I felt it myself during this project. However, if we do avoid addressing issues related to race, then we are perpetuating whiteness and Eurocentrism. Bihari, Leek et al. Argue that if educators are vulnerable with discussing their position as co-learners with students on matters of decolonisation, then this can build trust and allow space for important change-making conversations to occur. This supports the argument shown earlier by West that white educators hold great power to invoke social change from within the classroom. Therefore, we must use this power positively. To conclude, I found the research to be an interesting and valuable experience. My students exceeded my expectations and really engaged with the project with open minds. I felt it helped me grow as an educator too. We worked together and as co-learners learned a lot. So I would highly recommend explorations like this for other ISTD dance teachers. If I were to undertake this research again, I would like to explore other dance schools, exam boards, and with students who I don't usually teach to gain more data and more ideas. I acknowledge that it was a small-scale study and may have been limited somewhat by that. The research was not intended to devalue the ISTD tap dance syllabus, but more to enrich and enhance students' learning. If dance teachers could find time to schedule workshop classes like this or extend the length of classes to allow time for these learning activities, I think it would be beneficial. As discussed, the themes to think about including are improvisation that is informal, fun, and high energy, exploring African American music styles and rhythms. Historical dialogue, incorporating famous African American tap dancers and the racism that they may have experienced. Some themes that weren't able to fit within the scope of this presentation were non-syllabus choreography, exploring the characteristic movement styles of African American tap dance influences to uphold Black dance aesthetics. Also, another idea that emerged that could be developed further in future research was curriculum design. Thinking beyond the norm about other ways to enrich and enhance learning could be watching performances, going to workshops or classes outside of the dance school, or inviting guest teachers with significant experience with African American influences on tap dance to the dance school. I would also recommend that dance teachers engage with current research to stay informed about progressive practices that are emerging in the field. Research often explores practices that are implemented in formal education, and it would seem rarely the private dance school. Therefore, we can use this research in formal settings to enhance the educational experience within private sector dance schools. Through all of these themes and suggestions, positioning ourselves as co-learners through exploration and vulnerability could lead to impactful change for ourselves as well as our students. Overall, I believe we as teachers could use the title of this presentation as a motto for how to approach tap dance and decolonising private sector dance schools. Teaching students beneath and beyond the syllabus could be a valuable way to enhance and enrich student learning, while hopefully supporting greater inclusion and representation of students and teachers of the global majority within the private sector dance school. Thank you for watching. The following slides show the references for this presentation.